Welcome to Community Chat for October 7th. A couple brief updates, and we'll take a look at something together just related off of the week's releases. First on Core, 709, 7.0.10 was released in the past week. Largely, this was a global for the global event handling for some scenarios. So depending on different production builds, way Webpack was set up, depending if you're using a different flavored front-end framework, some of the globals could have been included in the pack in a slightly different order depending on the setup. So we did some adjustments to the globals to kind of help those scenarios. One was related to tree shaking in 7.0.10 specifically, because with ESM you can take advantage of the more advanced tree shaking. And so we're starting to lean more on side effects in the package, which is a more flexible way, I think, generally with ES 2015 and above with Webpack for tree shaking. There was also a fix for fragment on pause on Android as well that was using the wrong API. So this was a nice fix here. If anyone had experienced anything around fragments and resume and suspend. Let's see, a couple adjustments with Observable Array in dealing with splice. There was some kind of long-standing things around Observable Array. We've been looking at a few more of those lately too. So 7.0.9, 7.0.10 on Core. Again, we always recommend people use tilde on their projects because generally if you're doing cleans on a regular basis on your projects as you're developing, you're going to get those latest patch releases. So generally a tilde on 7.0.0 is a good place to be. So let's touch on Xcode 12. So the final releases with the Xcode 12 iOS 14 stack were put out last week. That was 7.0.10 of the NativeScript CLI. 6.5.3 if you're using JavaScript core runtime for iOS, that's the tns-ios version. And then if you're using the new V8 runtime, that's the NativeScript iOS version. 7.0.1 was published there. That contained one final adjustment built with the final Xcode 12, because NativeScript iOS on 7 was built with an Xcode 12 beta. So if you had anything related that you were still encountering with Xcode 12, just make sure you're on these versions. And then I want to touch on kind of the key thing with Xcode 12, and I want to show this as an example for anyone out there that may run into this, or maybe who had run into this in their Xcode 12 experiments. But so let me show you what you could see if you went to upload a build to the App Store, you would possibly see an error like this. This is actually similar to an error that you would see on the CLI that did not have Xcode 12 compliance. It all kind of revolves around this deprecation notice related to valid arcs flag. They changed it to excluded arcs in Xcode 12, and valid arcs is now deprecated, and they're now discouraging the use of this flag. This flag was used in build xeconfig files in different projects. CocoaPods used this flag as well. It was also used in the CLI in some scenarios. And so we changed that to the new Xcode 12 excluded arcs syntax. And actually you can see that in these screenshots here. So actually, let me put these side by side. Excluded arcs is the Xcode 12 syntax, and valid arcs is the now deprecated one. So what's interesting that they did, now this is for anyone out there that had tried to upload to TestFlight and may still see this. You should not see this if you're using these versions, 7.0.10 and these iOS runtimes, but there are still some edge cases that you could run into this. And so I want to show on this call, for anyone that does encounter this, there's actually an easy way to fix this. So let me open Xcode. And it is related to valid arcs. And these screenshots here show an example of what you could see in your own project depending on CocoaPods that you were using. The most likely scenario is your project was using CocoaPods that had not done any type of Xcode 12 updates. So they might be older CocoaPods, or maybe it was a newer release, but they just didn't adjust the valid arcs yet. Xcode 12 is going to end up pulling valid arcs out of the build settings, and it's going to drop it down into user-defined settings. And just to show everyone where that is, so let's go here. So build settings, you can look at it. You can choose combined on build settings on any project. And at the very top, you'll see an architectures section. Architectures, it's very normal to see standard. This is really what you want to see for architectures. But the interesting part is this excluded architectures section. And you'll see any iOS SDK is generally for the device or phone that's going to the store. And then this is the simulator for debug and release. And you can see right now, in this particular case, they're the same. So it's basically excluding any architecture that is not supported on that particular target. Simulator is x86, but a device you wouldn't want to build for the store with the x86 slice, so it excludes that from the release. And this is what you want to see generally. Now, if you're encountering an issue like this, what most likely it's related to is a CocoaPod your project is bringing in that has the valid arcs, and Xcode 12 will drop it down to the very bottom in the user-defined section. So this is going to be at the very bottom. And you'll see valid arcs here. And valid arcs is generally going to be listed here if a CocoaPod had brought that in. And most likely what's happening is that test flight, when you upload here, the App Store is actually doing a scrub on the arcs, and this is at the final step. It'll actually look like it's going to succeed, and then it will fail with an error like this. And it's because valid arcs is probably in your project, and more than likely it's in the user-defined section, and the release target has x86 in it. You can see in this particular project, x86 is removed because in the latest CLI versions it's removed. But there are still some edge cases, like I was mentioning, depending on the way the CocoaPod is set up, how old it is. You could still end up with x86 listed as release. So that's what these screenshots show. So you could end up with a user-defined section looking like this. Debug and release are the same. You do not want to see this. This is actually what causes this issue. So if you do encounter that, what you want to do is just remove x86 from release. And you may have to do that manually, just depending on what CocoaPods you're using. And so you want it to look like this here on the bottom. x86 slice is removed from the release arcs. So when you actually go to do an archive and upload to test flight, the release build will actually not contain that slice. And that's in fact what causes this type of App Store error at the last step. And that is the key Xcode 12 difference to really be aware of. It's primarily the only difference is just that switch up from valid arcs to excluded arcs. More than likely, CocoaPods, the more and more most get updated for Xcode 12, will probably start moving, I'm sure, to excluded arcs, and you'll see less and less valid arc related stuff. But a really key, fairly subtle change, but one that definitely can cause a lot of confusion if you don't really understand what's happening there.